The first step in installing our CPU cooler is to remove the standard AMD clips. They're each held on with 2 screws. And then we've got one of these thumb screws to go onto each corner. If you're going to be installing on an Intel motherboard, the first thing to do is install your backplate. Now these pins have 2 different positions. To install on an LGA 1200 motherboard, you're going to want to make sure you push all the pins to the inner setting. If you're going to be installing an LGA 1700 or 1851 socket, you're going to want to make sure you put all these pins to the outer setting. So I've got them all in the outer setting, and this then should line up with the back of our motherboard. There's then 2 different spacers. The smooth spacers are for LGA 1200, where the ones with the indentations are for LGA 1700 and 1851. And then there's just 1 spacer to push onto each corner. We're now ready to install our AIO, and it's great to see that our fans are pre-installed on the radiator. So all we're going to need to do is take our fan cable that comes in the box and push it into place in each fan. There's 3 different connectors on it. And then on the other end, we've got a 4-pin PWM cable. We're going to plug that into our CPU fan header on the motherboard. And then we've got a 3-pin 5-volt ARGB cable. And if we plug that into a header on our motherboard, it's going to allow us to control all the lighting. In terms of the cables coming from our pump, we've got this 3-pin cable we're going to plug into our pump header on the motherboard. And that's going to allow us to control the speed of the pump. We've got a 3-pin 5-volt ARGB cable. And again, we're going to plug that into a header on our motherboard. There's also a little splitter cable, so what we could do is plug the cable from our fans and the radiator into the splitter cable, meaning we only need 1 ARGB header on our motherboard. We've also got a SATA cable to power the pump, and we'll plug that into a SATA cable coming from our power supply. And then our last cable is a USB cable, and we plug that into a USB 2.0 header on our motherboard. That's going to allow us to control the effects on our pump screen. So this is our pump screen, and one really cool thing about this pump, it has a gyroscope built into it. So no matter what way you install it in your build, the screen is going to be up the right way. You can see we've got thermal paste pre-applied to the back of it, so we're just going to have to be careful we don't damage it during the installation. Next thing to do is install the brackets for our pump. So if you've got an Intel motherboard, you're going to use these brackets. And if you've got an AMD motherboard like we do, you're going to use these brackets here. If you're going with AMD, you're just going to have to be careful which way you put these brackets on, because they're not going to be symmetrical and it's only going to fit on the motherboard one way round. So I'm happy to have the tubes at the bottom, so I'm going to be installing it this way round. So we can go ahead and secure it into place using these small screws. Then we can set our case's top fan bracket into place, and we'll secure it into place using the short radiator screws. Then I'm just going to line the pump with the bracket we've installed on the motherboard, and we just need to get a thumb screw onto each corner. And there's some plastic protection on the screen that we can remove. So our AIO has quite a lot of cables coming from the bottom of it. Normally I would route these up towards the top of the motherboard, but because I'm going to have a vertical GPU, I'm actually going to route these down towards the bottom where the cables are all going to be hidden. So we do actually have a pump header down the bottom of the motherboard, so we'll plug the 3-pin pump cable into it. We've got a USB header at the bottom of the motherboard, so we'll plug the USB cable into it. And then I'm just going to pass all the rest of the cables through to the back. Our CPU fan header is this grey header at the top of the motherboard, so we'll plug the PWM cable coming from our fans and the radiator into it. And then we can just pass the ARGB cable through to the back. Then at the back of the case, we can daisy chain the ARGB cable from our fans and the radiator into the ARGB cable from our pump. And then we can plug it into one of the ARGB headers on our fan hub, or alternatively, if you prefer, you can plug it directly into an ARGB header on your motherboard. Last, we've got the SATA cable coming from our pump, which we can plug into the SATA cable coming from our power supply. Okay, so in terms of setting up our AIO, we're going to head over to our AIO's page on DeepCool's website, click on Downloads, and then we're going to download the setup file. And we'll click on Download. Once it's downloaded, we can head over to our Downloads folder, and we'll click on the setup file. Click Yes, and Install. And then we'll click on Finish to run it. Okay, so when the software opens up, first of all, we get some information about our computer. We can see information on our CPU, its load, how much memory we're using. We can see information on our GPU, our storage, and our network. We click on the second tab, again, just some information about our system. And it's this third tab where we're actually going to make changes to our device. So in terms of the changes we can make, when the AIO is loading up before the software has loaded, we can either have a blank screen or use the DeepCool animation. I'm just going to leave the DeepCool animation on. We can adjust our screen brightness, so I can drag this all the way up, and you'll notice our screen should get brighter. It's currently using the gyroscope, so our screen is up the right way. We can turn this off, and then we've got the option of rotating our screen. So you'll see when I press this, it is rotating round, but I'm going to go with the gyroscopes allowed. In terms of RGB on the pump itself, there's not an awful lot of RGB lighting. At the moment, I've got it synced up to the motherboard, so it is in white. If I turn this off, it's going to switch over to enable temperature warning, and the RGB will change depending on the temperature. I'm just going to leave it set to the motherboard. So we need to set up our I/O. So here we've got our CPU fan, so it's plugged into our CPU fan header, and our pump fan, I've actually plugged it into a pump header in the bottom of the motherboard. System 1 is actually our fan hub, so it's not actually showing up the header that our pump is plugged into. If we head over here, this is how we can control our screen. So at the moment it is set up to monitor mode. In the main display area, so we've currently got our CPU frequency, and then we've got the auxiliary display area down the bottom. So we can adjust the main area. So we want to go for time, we can do that. We can change over to pump speed, which it can't detect at the moment because actually we don't have our pump showing up here. If I set this to system fans, it would actually show the speed of our current system fan header, but this isn't actually our pump speed. CPU fan speed is the fans on the radiator. CPU fan plus pump speed, so we can split the screen, or we can have temperature here. So I think I'm going to go back to the default display, CPU frequency for now. And we've got style options here, so that's normal. We can have it as a ring, or we can have it as a stopwatch. So I think again, I'll just leave that on normal for now. Down at the bottom, we've got the voltage mode, but again, we've got options for this as well. We can have a system monitor. So this looks like CPU temperature, CPU usage, and RAM usage. Or we can have our core data. So again, I'm just going to leave that on the default settings for now. So monitor mode is one option. Up here, again, we've got media mode. So here we're able to upload images or GIFs. So let's add an image in. We head over to, and we'll add my logo in. We can center the area that we want to show and click on confirm. And you'll notice now that my logo is appearing in the AIO. You've got the option to add in more images and cycle through them with the interval down below here. And then the final mode that we have is recording mode. So you can see at the moment we have got our CPU frequency and our CPU temperature, and they're going to be displayed as a recording on the screen.